We tend to memorize the monsters of true crime. We learn their nicknames and their elaborate mythologies, while the people whose lives were stolen are often reduced to a chronological timeline of clues. The cost of the BTK murders is traditionally measured by the length of the police hunt, but the deeper story lives in the decades following the crimes, where survivors had to rebuild their reality after cameras moved on. Before 1974, families like the Oteros and victims like Catherine Bright lived out ordinary routines. They managed morning breakfast rushes, school schedules, and neighborhood errands, resting on the assumption that a home provides a boundary. It is the place where the public world stops and private life begins. The violence that killed the Oteros and Catherine Bright shattered that boundary. The attacker invaded these sanctuaries, converting bedrooms and living rooms into sites of violation that no locked door could prevent. This wasn't a temporary shock. It destroyed the fundamental civic assumption of safety in Wichita. The survivors inherited a world where the most familiar spaces had become untrustworthy, leaving them to navigate a city that no longer felt like home. The offender targeted the city's sense of its own story. He sought to seize authorship of the public narrative, attempting to force the entire community to organize its collective fear around his presence. He sent taunting letters to police and local newsrooms, signing off with a set of self-appointed initials. These communications were an attempt to turn the victims into props for his own legend, using his written claims to overwrite their human identity. This created a distorted atmosphere where the killer controlled the clock. He manipulated public systems to ensure the city paid attention to him on his schedule, using the threat of a new letter to hijack the evening broadcast. For the families, this was a secondary assault. They were denied the ability to privately mourn their loved ones because the killer continually converted their private grief into public property for his own gratification. The survivors faced a reality that defied logic. Kevin Bright, wounded on the curb after a desperate escape. The Otero children, returning from a normal school day to find their family unit had been systematically dismantled. These survivors were left to process a devastating contradiction. The fact that an ordinary delay or a simple decision to be elsewhere was the only reason they were alive to witness the destruction of their homes. Then comes the investigative demand. Detectives need habits, schedules, and intimate details. The very process of seeking justice requires survivors to take their private family memories and hand them over to be used as forensic evidence. The offender ensured the fear remained present. After killing Nancy Fox, he called the police from a public payphone. He used a mundane street corner to insert his actual voice into the city's bloodstream, choreographing the moment of discovery. While the public eventually views an unsolved crime as a cold case, the survivors experienced no such distance. Their attempts to rebuild are perpetually interrupted by the killer's ongoing efforts to remain relevant. In 2004, the letters returned. The killer resurfaced because the public's focus had begun to drift. He couldn't handle being forgotten, so he reached out to reclaim the spotlight he believed he owned. This reemergence forced survivors, who had spent 30 years building lives around an absence, back into the media cycle. Once again, their private history was being manipulated on the offender's schedule. To survive this, the families practiced a form of stubborn continuance. This isn't the dramatic closure of a movie. It is the unglamorous daily work of refusing to be defined by violence. It means forming relationships, holding jobs, and remembering the victims as they were before they became part of a headline. Against an offender obsessed with absolute control, the simple act of continuing to live and love as a human being is a radical form of defiance. The break in 2005 wasn't a feat of master detection. It was a mundane digital mistake, born from the killer's overconfidence and his desperate need to be recognized. He sent a floppy disk to a television station, believing he had cleared it. Instead, hidden metadata in a deleted file pointed investigators toward a local church and a username that finally provided a match. The initials were stripped away. The decades of mailed terror were reduced to a traceable artifact, a mundane digital trail that led away from the mythical monster and toward a specific house. The face behind the mask was Dennis Rader. He was a church leader, a scout volunteer, and a municipal compliance officer, a man who used the clothing of civic trust to hide his predation. The reveal exposed a chilling disconnect in how we recognize danger. Wichita spent 30 years searching the shadows for an outsider, while the man responsible was busy maintaining the very structures the community used to feel safe. Rader's 2005 guilty plea and 10 life sentences provided the state with its resolution, but the legal system's accounting can never offer emotional restoration. A prison sentence cannot return 30 years of stolen life. The actual resolution arrived during the victim impact statements. For the first time, the survivors seized the microphone and reclaimed the narrative that had been violently occupied since 1974. Their testimony shrank the killer back into a powerless man in an orange jumpsuit. By speaking their truth, they restored their loved ones into full human beings, moving them out of the offender's chronology and back into their own families. Rebuilding from this trauma is a lifelong battle for authorship. It is the final refusal to let a killer write the end of the story, ensuring the victims remain the center of their own lives.